Thank you very much for the last session. I'm now going to introduce two people to you who really need no introduction because you already know them. First of all, our chair of AMBA BGA, Bodo Schlegelmilch, and once again, making a repeat appearance in a record time, Steef van der Velde.
So good afternoon. This is a problematic session for various reasons. First of all, we are the only ones who keep you away from the networking dinner, which I understand is really nice. So it's the last session. It's the third session. Thank you very much. I get the technology as well now. It's the third session in a row, and you might be stiff. So if you want to get up and stretch and do some exercises, that's fine with me. You know, you can do that. So I don't take offense, quite the opposite. And then the third issue is that you have two AMBA apparatchiks here. Steef is going to chair the session, and myself. And Steef sharing a session is problematic because he's bad in timekeeping. So, you know, we have a number of issues here, I thought I mentioned this, Steef. So anyhow, let me see whether I can actually work this. Where do I press? On this one? Yeah, that's super. So the issue today, or the topic today, is pressure points in developing innovative business school strategies. And the way we are dividing the session is as follows. We basically decided, what Steef told me, because you know he's always very directive. We decided that I should start with some remarks, a few PowerPoints. Then Steef will ask me all sorts of weird questions, difficult questions, which unfortunately he didn't reveal to me. So they're really a surprise, and I'm not quite sure about how I would feel about this. So, a bit of a problem. And then he's opening up for about an hour or so of audience interaction. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's right. So, what we're doing is essentially the argument of this session is that we have a number of macro drivers, and I'm going to pretty much arbitrarily select 4. There are more. Depending on how you divide. We heard Andrew's 8, for example. We have all sorts of other SDGs as macro drivers can be constructed, but I'm just focusing on 4. And the argument then is that these 4 macro drivers lead to pressure points in our strategy development process, and that again basically calls into question our strategy for the future. Our meaning business schools strategies for the future and the trajectories where business schools go. So the macro drivers I would like to focus on are, number 1, technology. And we've heard a lot about technology. People talk about paradigm shifts, technological paradigm shifts. People talk about transformation. People talk about the technological vortex and so on. So lots and lots of focus has been put on the technology and how this is changing business schools. We heard about teaching online, teaching blended learning, and so on. So this falls all into this realm. Second one is geopolitical changes. We find ourselves unfortunately, in a situation where the geopolitics surrounding us is not favorable. Think about the Russian war in Ukraine, think about the decoupling of China, the tensions between the United States and China, and so on. And obviously that has impact on business schools. And to think about a very mundane example, there are no Chinese delegates here at the moment because they're still stuck in China since they're not allowed to travel because of COVID. But there are also other implications, such as the fact that fewer and fewer Chinese students feel the urge to go abroad and would like to study domestically. So the student numbers, the student flows going from China to the United States, to the UK, for example, is slowing down. Then we have value changes, and we heard lots and lots of value changes in terms of focusing more on the purpose our stakeholders, be it governments, be it industry, be it also the students, demand different topics. That was essentially the focus of last session, so I don't want to go into this. And at the very end, we still are grappling with the pandemic. And in a way, we hope it has gone, but you know, we're not quite sure. So there might be some implications there. So if we look at a typical strategy matrix or strategy cascade, it's not a matrix, it's a cascade, I think, where you start what the purpose of the organization is, you then ask where we compete, how we compete, what we need to compete, and the systems we need to put in place to measure everything to make it gel. This is a typical strategy matrix. All of you deans will know this, etc. And so we relate this to business schools. The first one is, what's the purpose of the business school? And if you cast your mind back to all the presentations, well, nearly all the presentations we had, that was the purpose of the business school was one of the key discussions. You know, has the purpose changed? Is the purpose more moving towards social responsibility, towards impact, etc.? Or is it getting research out in A journals and get the number of citations up as much as possible? So what are the purpose of the business school? Now this, in a way, the answer to this is reflecting what we do in research. For example, in the previous session, we heard impactful research. Now, yeah, what is impactful research? Impactful in terms of getting loads and loads of citations, impactful in terms of changing somebody's behavior, changing how corporates behave, how governments behave, how hospitals behave, or whatever. So what makes research impactful? It changes the way we teach. You talked about, for example, taking students out, making them doing social projects, etc. And it changes our third mission. So we have a number of pressure points. Pressure points are the type and impact of research. What is the appropriate research for a school? On what depends the appropriate impact of the school? Does it depend on the location, on who is the financee of the school? Is it a private school? Is it a school that is financed by the government? Is it a school embedded in a big university or not, etc.? So all this is impacting on research. Content of the curriculum, again, the focus of the last session, so I don't want to go into that, but we suddenly have to teach or subjects that were inherently not taught 20 years ago. Sustainability, CSR, you know, do we invite philosophers perhaps to become professors? Have we already done that? So lots and lots of things change here. And then we reach new audiences. And this can be new target groups and new regions. But here I'm talking about particular target groups because it's the third mission. We cannot stop saying, okay, you are 25 years old now, you have graduated, or 30 years old, or you have graduated from the business school, end of story. But we have to continuously go with our audience and invest into lifelong learning, etc. Right, need to speed up a little bit because otherwise Steef is in problems. Market definition. Where do we compete? Traditionally, market definitions may have a geographical focus. You know, do we compete in our own area, in Bogota only, or in Cartagena only, in Colombia? Do we compete regionally? Do we compete internationally? So there's a regional focus, but there's also a people focus. You know, what market segments are we competing in? Are we competing in the market segment of people who are, let's say, seeking branding and prestige from an MBA? Or are we competing in an area where people want to transform their lives in one way or the other, but branding is perhaps less important and so on? So what are the market definitions we have? So geopolitics has changed this again, and the impact of COVID has changed this again, to the extent that COVID has made people more reflective. And they have become much more thoughtful about the purpose of life. Why are we there? What are we doing, etc. So COVID has, in a way, led to a reflection of what we are for. And then, of course, pressure points in terms of geopolitics, the international student and faculty mobility. Think about Brexit. In the UK, people now cannot get access to European research funds, EU research funds. Big tragedy in my view. Faculty mobility. Well, we find it difficult to exchange faculty with China at the moment. Not only because of COVID, by the way, but also because of politics. Russia is a completely different issue. Impact of technology on geographic market definitions. We now are in a situation where we suddenly have competition in, let's say, Peru from Spain. Giuseppe, I don't know whether you're offering something in Peru. Presumably he is one of the baddies here. But you know, the Spanish business schools go into the Latin American market to compete online. So suddenly you have a new set of competition. But you don't only have a new set of competition in terms of the traditional business schools. You also, on top of that, have a new competition by non-traditional players, such as the Coursera's of this world, the LinkedIn's of this world. LinkedIn's, difficult one. Okay, so different market definition here. Competitive advantage. Well, how do we compete? Yesterday we had the council meeting here, and one of the issues was, you know, how do we differentiate? How do we differentiate what we are doing? Because differentiation is important. Well, somehow or the other, we are moving into a situation where competition becomes much more a question of business model. Do we have the right business model rather than do we have the right curriculum? Is the way we are offering our services, is that still timely or not? So we're moving more into a business model competition. It's not only a question of new delivery modes in terms of, you know, we are changing from online to offline and flipped classrooms, etc. But we also need a different pedagogy in order to teach these days. And all of this, I would argue, is then leading to a polarization of the market. We will have from our, I think there are about, according to AACSB, if I may mention the competition, Andrew, there are about 16,000 business schools. Yeah. Problem is, nobody really knows this, so I specifically refer to AACSB so you can blame them if it's wrong, you know, because somehow or the other, if you have some kind of outfit over on top of a butcher's store and they call themselves business school, do you count that or not? You know, it's very difficult to really define what a business school is and is not. But overall, if we have, let's say, some 16,000 business schools, I believe that it will have a polarization. There will be some schools which will be highly differentiated. They will be known for something, for entrepreneurship, for example. There will be having strong brands, very strong brands, and people want to go there because they want to have an MBA from Miami, for example. Yeah, I play the audience, I know. So that's bad. So they want to have an MBA from a good business school, and so on and so forth. These business schools will be accredited. They will have brand recognition. They will have high rankings, etc. And then there will be business schools that are operating on a very, very different volume system. They will not be particularly differentiated, but they will still exist because of high volumes and high cost efficiencies. It's like the traditional, you know, differentiation versus low cost. So you have the differentiation on the one hand, low cost on the other side, and I think that will be reflected in the business school environment as well, with the implication, and that's the problem, that the business schools in the middle that are not particularly well differentiated and not particularly good in terms of controlling their costs, they will have problems and they will be weeded out sooner or later. Then resources and capabilities. Well, we need new resources and capabilities. So far, it was always, well, we need a few interesting and clever professors who were rhetorically good and who could publish, etc. But suddenly, we need to invest in technology. We need to have capabilities in terms of broadcasting and so on. And if you now go into most business schools, you find rooms, classrooms somewhere that look more like a TV studio than anything else. So technology is king. We need to try and develop new routines, both intra and inter-organizational routines and practices, because we need to, for example, always connect to external providers of technology. Think about Canvas, our main sponsor. Most of us use Canvas, or many of us, don't know most, many of us use Canvas as a platform to deliver courses. So we need to interact with them regularly. That means we need to have somebody who is good at cooperating, to forge new corporations. And it also questions the operational boundaries, the organizational boundaries. Because if you, for example, are working like we in Vienna do with VU and many others do, we're working in a SEMS program. And the SEMS program is a joint program with various business schools. Rotterdam is one of them. And if we then decide to go for Canvas, well, another school finds it difficult to go for a different platform. So in a way, you move not only in terms of decision-making, you don't only have the decision-making involved in the business school, but you have a decision-making involved in platforms or in alliances. So you have a strategic alliance like, for example, SEMS, and they have to make lockstep decisions in order to make it work. So that makes it even more difficult, and it obviously calls into question the organizational boundaries. So, last but not least, monitoring and accounting and steering. Here we have pressure points in terms of real-time efficiency. When I look at my mobile, from time to time, every 2 or 3 years, I get something like, you have just been published, or you have just been cited. Hopefully not every 2 or 3 years, but very often on a regular basis. You've just been cited by this and so on. Google Scholar is brutal. They show you exactly who publishes, where, how often they have been cited, where you stand in the world ranking, where you stand in the ranking of your business school, where you stand in the ranking of, let's say, of your subject area, and so on. So there is this sort of real-time efficiency measures, which are becoming more and more important. And then, and we've talked about this long before, in fact, as Steef said, it's presumably the key word of the conference, the impact. How do we measure impact? What is really a good impact? Is it research impact? And you kindly reminded us of the purpose of the business school is also knowledge creation, etc. But how do you measure this? How do you measure, for example, what is impactful research and what isn't impactful research? Is impactful already when you mention the word SDG once, or has there be more to it, or what is really impactful? So taking this collectively, I would like to suggest a matrix, a 2x2 matrix. In fact, one of my mentors at one stage said, whenever you talk to an audience, and particularly when it's late, never ever use a 3x3. That loses everybody. That's really, really bad. Restrict yourself to a 2x2. And even in your remotest dreams, never ever do something which is three-dimensional. You definitely lose the audience. So, this is a simplification. It's a model. Models are imperfect. There is nothing like a perfect model. A perfect model is like a perfect wife or perfect husband. It doesn't exist in reality. Don't tell that to Irene that say that. So anyhow, we can distinguish between strategy at program level and at business school level, and transitional change and transformational change. Again, nothing much important and nothing much new in there. But then when we see where do we as schools operate, if we operate only here in the incremental area where we change our teaching method and delivery mode, we perhaps miss a trick, because that's only part of the change which we are going through. Because At business school levels, it might be more a question of mergers and acquisitions. We are moving in we are in a very strange industry. On the one hand, the existing business schools, the so-called incumbents, are getting more and more under pressure, and they're moving into, or they are already in a very mature phase, very entrenched in competition. You know exactly who are the good players, the bad players, and little movement. Then on the other hand, we have lots and lots of newcomers. And so what happens in the industry is that we have lots of mergers, acquisitions, etc. Think about the United States. The school I used to work for, Thunderbird, the American Graduate School of International Management, they were just taken over, bailed out, depending on how you see it, by ASU. In the UK, Henley Business School was bailed out by Reading and rescued by Reading. In France, you have loads and loads of mergers and acquisitions, and they always end up with weird names which you can recognize because they have these acronyms, and then you don't know where the business schools are located anymore. But anyhow, so lots of mergers and acquisitions. Again, flipping to program level, transformational. Well, transformational would be if you change this, but you operate with third parties. You operate with third-party providers. You're reaching out beyond the boundaries of the organization. So that's already much more transformational. And lastly, arguably, this is a strategic change which reflects the entire organization. And of course, that's something you can push and push and push as much as you want, because you can say even, well, let's call into discussion whether we should give degrees for life. I was at one stage giving an interview with the Financial Times and was teasingly suggesting, not seriously, suggesting that degrees should have an expiry date. So if you don't do anything in order to refresh your knowledge, after 5 years, your MBA is invalid. Yeah? Great, wouldn't it be nice? Well, I don't think most business schools will not buy into that, and definitely the people who invest into MBAs will not be too happy. But in principle, the thought process is essentially that we need to think about continuous lifelong learning here. But it's more than that, because as I said, we're moving into a business model competition. In Japan, I've just been in Japan for AMBA with George Ilyev. Some of you might know him. We visited a school, or we talked to a school that is called Globis. I don't know whether you have heard about Globis. It's not one of the schools which spring to mind when you talk about Japan and we talk about leading business schools, etc. And as a minor by the by, they have 40% market share in Japan. 40% in the MBA market. We would never, ever even remotely think about accrediting them, because, for example, they have virtually no PhDs. It's all CEOs or ex-CEOs, practitioners who teach, but the Japanese students seem to love it. So a very, very different type of business model. Or you go into The Economist, you get The Economist and you go through the paper and you see big adverts, the new business school, the modern business school, etc., only online and what have you. So it's a situation where we move into different business models, and that is perhaps the most difficult strategic challenge we are facing. Anyhow, that's it from my point of view. So if you want more, send me an email, and I'm serious about it. Send me an email, because I have actually written an article or two about this, and of course, then you have to cite it, and I get more citations, so it's wonderful. But other than that, I leave it to Steef to ask me all the difficult questions now. Thank you. Oh, that was one too many, sorry. Okay, leave it like this.
Thank you very much, Bodo. Of course, you preempted already some of the questions that I already shared with you.
I anticipated that, yeah.
So, well, I mean, I don't know whether, whenever I see a 2x2 matrix, you try and figure out what the limitations are, right? I mean, typically it will stick for 90%, but what about the remaining 10%? So my first question is the following. If you talk about business schools, there's a big difference between standalone business schools and university-based business schools. So if you put this down as one of the options, then I think that only applies to standalone business schools, because for Vienna, I guess that's no option.
Well,
I mean, say to merge with RSM.
Definitely not with RSM. No, I mean, whatever we do, but no. But seriously, of course, it makes a difference how the business school is financed, for example, and whether it's embedded in a bigger organization. I think more fundamentally, one should say that there is no such thing as a typical business school, because depending on the environment, depending on the size of the school, depending on the teaching mode, depending on embeddedness, etc., they're all different. So what is a typical business school? So of course, this doesn't always apply to everybody. And as you said, if it's 90% correct, it's great, because we are focusing on the big picture. There will always be exceptions where you say, well, that doesn't really apply. So for some big business schools like Vienna, and we have 600 faculty in business. We are state funded. We have 20,000 students. There's no way that we would merge, and the government would presumably not allow us to merge. So from that point of view, it isn't really an option for us. You're absolutely right there. So I give that to you. That's a negative one.
But if you think about competing in the future, so who would you say or think is in a better position? Standalone business schools or university-based business schools? And let me elaborate a little bit, because in the past I would think, you better be a standalone business schools, because you got more autonomy, you can do what you want, there's no provost or president hanging over your head, right? So you got more autonomy. But nowadays, we're talking about all these wicked problems and interdisciplinarity and cross-disciplinarity and multidisciplinarity. Then there's a strong need maybe to work with schools of engineering or design schools or medical schools, you name it, right? So, and then maybe you'd rather be a university-based business school. So in terms of strategy, how should I think about this issue?
Well, number one, you start off not with the playing field which is new. You can't, if you're becoming a dean somewhere, you can't really select, unless in terms of going to a business school, but if you're in a business school, you can't really say, I now decide to be a standalone, or I now decide to be an embedded business school in the larger university. You are what you are. So in terms of using some strategy slogans, a resource-based view of the firm, you work with the resources you have. You work with the resources you have, and both have advantages and disadvantages, because, as you said, if you're embedded in a wider university and you can cooperate with the medical school and, for example, have a medical MBA, or you cooperate with IT people and you bring them in when they teach analytics, etc. Of course, if you do this internally, this can have tremendous advantages. On the other hand, if you're a standalone business school, you tend to be very agile, and you can also cooperate externally. So to generalize which is better and which isn't better, I think it's very difficult, because, as you know, when you are a business school within a university, it really very much depends on the governance structure of the university, how much autonomy you have. Sometimes the business schools, giving you a concrete example, Manchester Business School reports to the head of social sciences, who then reports to the rector, or basically a vice principal, as it's called in the UK. So it's not very direct in terms of decision making, not very autonomous in terms of decision making. So it depends really on the idiosyncrasies of the situation.
So if you don't mind, I would like to focus on this.
I'm not quite sure whether I don't mind. Okay.
Let's quarter it a little bit more, right? So, because I think there are more options, right? So you referred to SAMS earlier, and I don't know how familiar you are with SAMS. ISADE is a member. I don't know what Oniandis is a member, right? And so for us, at least, it was very instrumental to internationalize and get better, right? So that also means that as a school, you need to think about what alliances you want to join or forge, right? So that would be one. Second, I know of a very famous French school, standalone business school. And then we all know that there's a strong need for data analytics and business science and so on. And they looked in their own school and thought, you know, we don't have these resources, these faculty, right? So with which universities of engineering or technology should we actually forge an alliance, right? So I would say there are more options than just mergers.
Yeah. Absolutely right, and plus it would lead to a 3x3 matrix because
Yes,
you
and I
have the
love
business
them.
school,
Yeah,
you
I
have the business school, then you have the alliances. So you have, you know, program level, business school level, and alliance level. I just didn't want to do that because it's too complicated.
Yeah, but then I got a PhD. I got a PhD in mathematics.
That's it. You know, I'm just a simple marketing strategy professor, so we don't do things like this. So that's the mathematical people. They're always different, but. I mean, seriously, yes, of course you can complicate it, or you can complete it, you know. And I was trying to focus on the, let's say, on the ease of communication, and rather than
you know, still I like this matrix a lot, right? But just to make you want to understand the limits and the boundaries and what you can do with it.
Yeah.
So if I understand correctly, you could be in different quadrants at the same time. Or not?
Yeah.
Or are they mutually exclusive?
No, they're not mutually exclusive. I think the danger is if you get stuck here and never consider the options. So it's more of a thought process of saying, you know, what other options do we have? Do we have to do everything internally? Or if we don't, who are the partners? And is it only something we do at program level? So do we have different partners at the MBA program, or do we have partners for the entire school, etc.? So it depends on the level. So it's giving you a guidance in terms of options more than anything else, and it certainly can be more comprehensive and made more complex.
And where would you say is Vienna?
No. We are a state-funded business school.
It sounds like an apology or apologetic.
It is limiting options. Yes, it's limiting options because, for example, when I was dean of the business school of Vienna, I wanted to go abroad and I want to set up programs abroad, and that wasn't allowed, you know, because it's out of the scope. So you can't do that. So it limits options. But we work exclusively, extensively with third-party provider in all sorts of areas, such as simulations. We buy them in, such as platforms, IT platforms, etc. This is not an option for us, as you said. Mergers and acquisitions is not an option, but alliances, which should be the third point here, would be an option. In terms of business models, I don't want to say anything bad about our current leadership. Okay, that's an in-joke, but anyhow, there could be doing more here in terms of changing where we're going, in terms of being more adventurous, in terms of where we go with our program. Yeah. Let's leave it at that.
So this is a conceptual model, right?
Yeah.
But if you would like to be, if I would want you to be a little bit more prescriptive, right?
Yeah.
What would you tell people over here what they should do?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to say, okay, what are the options which are open to us, number one, because not all the options are open, because somehow, as I said, in our own example, we can't go abroad, we can't do certain things, we can't merge, but sometimes these options are open to business schools, so it gives you a guidance in terms of possibilities. It's not there to say, okay, based on this, you should do that, because obviously you need to know the specifics of the business school in order to see what is possible for them and what isn't.
Because usually,
don't you want to go to the audience question?
Almost.
By now?
Yeah, no, but usually, no. I mean, we all know these 2x2 matrices, right? And in principle, I mean, I'm teaching operations. Where do you want to be? Take any 2x2 matrix. It's always in the right upper corner.
That's certainly something you should think of, because it gives you the widest scope, and I think it's very good to think about what are, from a conceptual point of view, what are the options in terms of business model? Is the model we are pursuing still the right business model? And that's essentially what the top right says here. And to question this, in the light of the competitive environment, in the light of technological changes, in the light of value changes we have, I think it's very, very prudent. And we've heard that before. I think schools here in particular in Latin America are already moving into that direction because the focus was so much on purpose and societal outreach and making a difference in terms of building societies. Quite frankly, Steve, I would not hear that in Europe. In Europe, there will be a very, very different conversation still. Yes, there is some outreach. Yes, there is some cognition of lifelong learning. But the difference is it's still research, 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 research. And that's the main thing. And the rest is of secondary importance.
Okay. Thank you very much. I would like to turn to the audience slowly. Right, so one question to you all, right? I mean, if you look at this matrix and you apply it to your own business school, where are you right now, okay? And I would like to see this by a show of hands. So how many would say we are in this quadrant?
Good.
Well, two tentative hands, right? Because typically, probably the lower left corner is not where you want to be. Is that it? Okay. This one? No one really? Operational? Probably the majority, right?
Yeah.
Strategic? Ah, wow.
Comme ci, comme ça, yeah.
That's not bad at all.
No.
No, so
good.
Seems to be a useful matrix after all.
After all, yeah. Very much contrary to expectations, I know that. Okay.
Anyway, let's open up for questions, right? We still have a lot of time. Yeah, and I notice you're very, very impatient.
Yeah. Is the question to Steef or to me?
No, to you.
Oh, all right, okay.
I think we're at Uninorte. We're going through a big strategic, we're working on our new strategy. Mm-hmm. And looking at this matrix, and when you seem to move up to that quadrant that says strategic, it seems like you start to have a little bit of less flexibility when you're a school that has accreditations. So to be moving, because if you change your whole business model, you have to also consider all of the considerations that the accreditation committees.
May I introduce Steef van der Velde, who is the head of our International Accreditation Advisory Board, which actually is a sub-board of the main board, but he makes all these decisions. So so it's really his forte.
Yeah, but the next review is in 5 years' time. Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, clearly, if you think about the principles, we have to make sure that they remain relevant, right? So that's and they're changing all the time to include new delivery formats, new programs, whatever. Yeah, you're right.
And think about, for example, the recognition of stackable degrees. You get somebody who has done a course 2 weeks at IBM or Google and so on and so forth, and he or she comes and says, well, look, by the way, I want to join your MBA, but this analytics course you have, that's really boring because I've done something which is far better. Here is my certificate. How do you work with this? Can you do this? Can you not do this? How do you evaluate the quality of that? So that's the reason we have Steef. He is and his
my
group,
purpose in life.
Because that's his purpose in life. Because he thinks about but quite seriously now he thinks about how the changes we are experiencing in the environment, in particular technological changes, competitive changes, etc., are impacting the accreditation criteria. And the last thing we want to do is to hinder development. Yeah. But, there's a big but, we still need to make sure that when somebody comes to the school, he or she gets a good quality. So, you know, it's a difficult one. It's not as obvious as it is. But in principle, you're right. We have to be careful. You have to be careful in terms of not throwing the accreditation criteria overboard.
Bodo, I have a question. We're here. So we've been working for the past 2 years in defining a new strategy at EAFIT in Medellin, and we're on board with the idea that we're connecting with organizations, and that's what we do. And then last week I got an email from the president of the Superior Council of the university asking me about Quantix, one of those schools in The Economist.
The Economist,
of course,
exactly.
you saw it in the last page of The Economist.
Yeah.
And he's completely obsessed with the model. So I went online and I started researching. I even took one of those free samples they offer. But I haven't quite figured out how to answer that that's not where we want to go. You know, that we want to be connected with organizations, that we want to be, but I don't know how to let him know that that's not necessarily where we are, and not because they're in The Economist and they spend a lot of money and whatever. That's not what our aspirational.
Well, I think number one, it's a question of differentiation, because when you are a school here in the region, you want to do something which is unique. And so your local connections, your ability to meet local managers, the fact that you provide a forum where students meet and forge connection to each other, that is a point of differentiation. And you would lose this differentiation if you would go down the pure online route. So I think there are horses for courses, and that basically comes back to will you be a differentiated player, which is accredited, which is ranked, which is working on its branding, or will you be a low value but volume player, where you say, okay, we offer something which is good enough, and some people will get an MBA, but then again, as we know, if you go to Bangkok, for example, and some of the roads, you can get a doctoral PhD for a few baht, and you don't even have to spend time at the business school. So what is the value? The value of your degree is, at the end of the day, who is giving the degree, who is behind the degree, and it's the reputation of your school, and you would lose that if you go down that route. I think Joseph had a question, and nobody allows him to answer the question.
And Leila had a next question.
He will be really peeved if he can't do that. But it will be a difficult question, I can tell. Yeah.
When compared with other industries, you realize that we are in a business which is the Mickey Mouse business. You were saying that there are more than 15,000 players. I mean, in all the other industries, we see how big corporations are getting a bigger and bigger market share, and they are consolidating and they are merging. But you know, the problem is that our industry is completely atomized. I mean, very small. If you measure the market share of one of the top in the industry, let's say Harvard Business School, it's going to be 0.0 whatever percent. So, and then a second question, or a second comment, and I would like you to tell me how they fit in this model. In the majority of industries, when there is a complete disruption, it's normally not done by the incumbent players.
From the outside.
It's done by the outsiders, and that's probably the real risk in our industry. I mean, to which extent our business model, which is a centennial business model, can be defended with new players coming into the industry faster, with probably a much more outreach, deep pockets, and looking for scalability.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
From a strategic point of view, how would you incorporate those two factors in your analysis?
Oh my gosh, this is it. I knew I shouldn't have asked you to ask the question. Well, number one, I think there are, you're absolutely right. At the moment, the single market shares of business schools is very small. If you look at share of mind, use a different one. You know, it's a different question, because when people say, okay, who are the leading business schools in the world? I think we get a fair degree of consistency there. So share of mind is presumably much more concentrated. But there is some mergers and acquisition activity going on quite clearly. And in particular in the US, for example, a lot of 2-year traditional MBA program, full-time 2-year MBA program, have ceased to exist. So you know that is something which we observe. So there is some weeding out, but maybe not quick enough. I think the real danger, and there I'm 100% with you, is the danger from the outside, the LinkedIn of this world, who basically come up with very, very different proposition, but and basically have more deeper pockets, better reach. They know more about their target audience, because people have their CVs on there. They know exactly what they've done before. Very often they say, people who are on LinkedIn, they say, okay, we would like to be finance director or marketing director in the future. So they can target very, very precisely what they offer. And so there's no way we can possibly compete with them as individual business schools. So that's perhaps the real danger. So yes, it's more the competition from the outside which should worry us, rather than competition from the inside. But there's certain things which business schools can do and these outsiders cannot do. And one of the most important things is research. So interestingly enough, when we come back to the idea of, you know, what is the purpose of a university, business school being part of a university, is knowledge creation. So by creating knowledge, we provide the raw material which they distribute. So to a certain degree, we have, as long as we are in the driver's seat in terms of doing the research, providing new ideas, new analyses, new concepts, new matrices, whatever, then I think you have something to communicate. Because the only thing they can do at present, well, maybe not the only thing, but the main thing they do at present is to distribute other people's ideas. And I think that's the main differentiator we have and we should defend.
And time is up, I'm afraid.
Thank you very much for your excellent leadership.
You insisted on timekeeping up. So let's give Bodo a big hand. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for being a very good moderator.
Okay.